Now, in 2004, 10 nations rejoined the European family, many of those in the Baltic States, Latvia among them. Now, in that process was the role also of Germany, and what Germany had to say about that, what Germany's role in all this was. We're going to get more of that with His Excellency, the Ambassador of Germany, Christian Heldt. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for sitting down with us.
Great having you on this holiday, which also marks exactly the 20th anniversary.
So we have good, impeccable, some would say German timing.
Absolutely.
So let's start with a little bit of history here.
Yeah.
As Germany looking into this part of the world, I think it was very integral in looking at EU enlargement. How is the German and Baltic and Latvian perspective in all this? How do you perceive it?
Well, I think it's important to look back at 1991, when also internationally diplomatic relations were taken up again with the newly independent Baltic states. Back then, Germany was the first here in Riga with a permanent ambassador back on the ground. So things already started well before 2004. Back then, our foreign minister, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, also in very close cooperation with his Danish colleague, Ulf Ellemann-Jensen, started processes also like the Baltic Sea Council to reunite this cultural space and the space as a whole, because all the divisions during the Cold War, also here in Latvia with Soviet occupation, basically separated one space. And in a way, it's back to the future, what happened back in '91, and then led also to EU accession in 2004. I do remember how I joined the Foreign Service in 1991, how back then also Hans-Dietrich Genscher went very deeply in those questions, and also the German government back then said full support for the perspective of joining the EU.
And I think it's also an interesting journey of not as with separation of, as you mentioned, the Soviet occupation, but I think also in a way it was always part of Europe, right? I mean, how do you perceive that? This part of Europe, so integral, also rejoining a long history of culture. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you just look at the history of Riga, Riga was a metropolis for centuries, starting from the Middle Ages, trade, culture, everything. If you look at the architecture of this fantastic city, it is Europe, of course. What else? So the best way to give Latvians goosebumps is to categorize them as former Soviet republic. No, it was Soviet occupation. And if you look at the long, very complex, of course, partially tragic story of Latvia, but it has been a thriving part of Europe for centuries. So that's why I also speak about reunification. What we had in a very small perspective in Germany in 1989-90, the same happened with Europe. And for me, the symbolic date is the 1st May 2004 with the accession of 10 countries, most of whom were not able to join this free space of democracy, which was founded back in the 1950s.
I know that through your work as well, you worked on the commemorations of the 1963 Élysée Treaty, yes. Which was important. Also very much solidifying that French-German reconnection as well. If you're looking also now broader, Paris, Berlin, going now into this region, has that maybe also now shifted more? Is there more European attention, more German attention here in this part of the world?
Absolutely. I mean, again, 1991, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, together with his French colleague Dumas and his Polish colleague Skubiszewski, founded the Weimar Triangle, which has been kind of lost out of sight for some time, but my feeling is it is getting new strength. What does that mean? Back in '91 already, the founders of this triangle realized that the old structures which we had in Western Europe could not work anymore without taking into account the new political geography of Europe. That counted in Poland, in the center of the Weimar Triangle, but also beyond, to take in this new perspective of a tremendously enlarged European Union.
Mm-hmm. And let's look at also the cooperation of Germany in this region, like into the Baltics. I mean, one major thing now recently is, of course, in defense. I mean, the whole paradigm has shifted because of Russia's illegal invasion. We're going to, in neighboring Lithuania, going to see, for the first time since the Second World War, a permanent German deployment abroad. What does that mean, just for not as a political signal, but what does that also mean for ordinary Germans?
It's a tremendous step, and I would even say it's a first ever, because if you take apart World War II, there never ever has been a permanent stationing of German troops abroad. Everything what we have seen as deployments over the past 20, 30 years have been temporary. Now, the stationing of the brigade, of course, has huge implications for the Bundeswehr people coming here, their families, but I think it will also create new bonds, taking you back into the time before 1989. Western Germany was the eastern flank of NATO. We had allies permanently stationing troops in Western Germany. Americans, French, British, Canadians, Belgians, Dutch, they lived there. That created human bonds. So my guess would be that as soon as the brigade is permanently stationed in Lithuania, it will also create a kind of new connect between peoples. So we will see, but it is definitely a huge step. The impact also in German society, we can't see it yet. This is something that has to develop over the next years.
I mean, also I want to touch on that for a moment, because if we look at the Nordics, the Baltic States, let's touch on a bit as well Ukraine. It seems almost very natural to most of these nations to immediately help, some of them contributing most of their GDP to defense, giving Ukraine what they need. It's also on a societal level. If you observe that, how is that also going to change in your mind in Germany as well? Because you said it's something that also has to change in mindset.
Absolutely. No, in that respect, I think we have come a long way. And for that, we also have to admit that we should have listened earlier to Eastern allies on the danger and the threat of Russia and its imperialist mindset. But I think there has been a lot of catching up. In a recent TV poll, there were numbers that, taking in account that this would mean cuts in other spaces, we have to do more for security by 73% of those who responded in that poll. So I think we are witnessing this shift already for some time now, and the wake-up call of the illegal and criminal invasion of Ukraine by Russia has given lots of people second thoughts about the price of security to further enable the whole of Europe to lead our democratic way of life.
Mm-hmm. That democratic way of life is in many ways under threat, externally, also internally. How would you characterize, in recent reports as well, we've seen that here in Latvia, we've seen that also unfortunately in Germany, looks like there is a Russian, nefarious, negative Russian influence on a political level. Is that something new? Has that always been there, we missed it, or what are we doing enough to counter it?
Again, mindset. There has to be more awareness, and I think there is more awareness. People here in Latvia have been exposed to destabilization, disinformation, not just since 2022 or 2014, but well before. If you look at Moscow propaganda, Latvia shouldn't even exist. So in that respect, there is a lot we can still learn from resilience here in neighboring Estonia and Lithuania and also in Poland, who told us for some time, watch out, this isn't good what's happening over there. But I'm very confident that this message has come through. And for me, the documentation that this wake-up call has arrived was our Chancellor Olaf Scholz's speech on the 27th of February. I was sitting upstairs here in my private rooms, and I couldn't believe at first what I was hearing there. But this famous Zeitenwende speech, I think, did a lot to change mindsets, to now come back also with respect to our NATO commitments to what we haven't done in a quarter of a century, alliance and country defense.
And I think this Zeitenwende, the sea change, it comes slowly. There's still voices saying that Germany is still not doing enough, that it's still not enough weapons delivery, still not enough action. I know there's criticism and credit where it's due. How do you perceive it from a diplomatic front? Do you see more attention as well now from Berlin on this part of the world? Do you see that sea change, that Zeitenwende really take shape?
I think so. I think so. Because, I mean, I can say that discussions in spring 22 weren't always easy. I told interlocutors that even if Germans, and we are notorious for that, being a little slow when we come in massively. And if you look, of course, from a GDP perspective, but also in absolute numbers, after the US, Germany is the second largest contributor now to military aid, humanitarian aid, with respect to taking care of Ukrainian refugees. We have 1.1 million, as I think the latest numbers are, in Germany. No, definitely, we have caught up, and this is also being appreciated here. Because often when we have German delegations, they wonder about the number of Ukrainian flags you can see here in the city of Riga and beyond also. And if people hear about filtration camps, about deportations, the traumata from the Soviet occupation here come back. Tens of thousands of Latvians, Estonians, Lithuanians were deported in 1941, in 1948, 49. So this rings a bell, and these are alarm bells. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people here remember. I think that's why also here at the Freedom Monument, that symbol as well, very important to the Latvian people. Back to more of the enlargement process. Yes. and Europe. When we look at the European Union, most people would associate it with economic freedom. It's very much that economic tie at its core. When the European Union continued to enlarge with those 10 countries, including Latvia, that joined, and Germany's role in that, was there more of an economic angle for this? Was there a security angle? And which is it now looking at future enlargement?
Well, I mean, there also have been tremendous changes over the past 2 years within the EU and financing mechanisms. If you just look at the European Peace Facility, which has now also been used to militarily support Ukraine with common funding. Initially, I think it was to bring the same degree of life quality in a democracy to all 10 joining countries, to reach the same standards, so we can move in a free European space in economic respect, in social respect, infrastructure. I mean, right here we have one of the biggest infrastructure projects in the EU running, the Rail Baltica, which also is highly political. You will have European tracks leading from Tallinn down to the Polish border and reconnecting the 3 Baltic states with the European network. Again, back to the future, as it was before Soviet occupation. of course, on a different technological standard. This is being funded to 85% by the Connecting Europe facility. So it is more than just, yes, also creating economic prosperity, but a linking together of this reunified space, also in terms of infrastructure and so many other fields.
Yeah. So I think ultimately this part of the world, and Latvia has benefited from a united Europe, rejoining, as you said, of the European family. Thank you so much for all your insights, Mr. Ambassador. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That's Sascha Fahrbach for TVP World in Riga, Latvia.